Coming up on Choppers Politics.
I must say, I sort of look on at the Parliamentary Party now colleagues who I know do never have supported the Prime Minister personally and have never supported Brexit. They think it's a complete disaster. And I do wonder how they sleep at night.
Hello and welcome to Choppers Politics, your weekly wander through Westminster's halls of power and beyond. I'm Christopher Hope, the Associate Editor for Politics at the Daily Telegraph. Now, I'm recording this in the basement of the Red Lion pub, but on the streets above me in Whitehall it's been a noisy week, not least because anti-Brexit campaigner Steve Bray had his speakers confiscated by police on Tuesday, the first day of the Police and Crime Bill coming into action. So I thought, who better to ask to join me in the Red Lion pub than Tory MP for Ashfield Lee Anderson, who, as some people on social media will know, has regularly clashed with Steve Bray outside the gates of Parliament. And Westminster being Westminster, this week has been dominated to a small degree by reports that some Tory MPs might be looking at crossing the floor to join Labour amid fears of a Tory wipeout at the next general election. So I thought, let's call up Phillip Lee, a former Tory MP who joined the Liberal Democrats at the height of the Brexit wars in 2019 to find out, well, how hard is it to cross the floor? But before that, this week saw Nicola Sturgeon, the SNP leader and Scottish First Minister, making clear her intentions to hold an indyref2, a second Scottish referendum on independence, next year. Her announcement blindsided Westminster to some extent because she has gone to the Supreme Court to see whether such a poll will be legal, given that the government in Westminster is highly unlikely to grant it. So who better to discuss what's going on in Scotland than David Mundell, the former Tory Scottish Secretary. David Mundell, welcome to Choppers Politics.
Great to be here.
It's a big week. It's Scotland Week for the royal family, and Nicola Sturgeon has used this to make some speeches, hasn't she? She's made some pledges about a new independence referendum. indyref2.
Yeah, my immediate response to that is just give us a break. I mean, we can't just go on and on about independence indefinitely. We had a referendum 8 years ago. It's clear now that Nicola Sturgeon and nationalist colleagues had no intention of respecting the outcome of that referendum, despite the fact they'd signed up to an agreement with the UK government to that effect. And this just started the day after. I remember the day after the referendum, the campaign for independence just started all over again, and it's become this never-ending. So now we've got Nicola Sturgeon's latest proposals for a referendum. We've got a reference to the Supreme Court, which we don't know whether that will be allowed or not. And then we've got the threat that if we don't agree with her and we don't accept her referendum, then she'll turn the next UK general election into a de facto referendum.
What's going on? The polls are showing a narrow win again for no. Some polls, other polls are saying a much wider win for no. Why is she pushing this agenda now?
I think Nicola Sturgeon is under a huge pressure from her activists within the SNP. They are people who are just blindly obsessed, which she now gives the impression herself of being, with having a referendum, with independence, not taking into account any of the surrounding circumstances. I mean, we're hardly out of COVID. The NHS in Scotland, is still recovering from that huge challenges that it's facing. We're heading into the cost of living crisis, which is just as acute in Scotland as in the rest of the UK. We've got the backdrop of the war in Ukraine. We've got all these other issues. We've got a Scottish government that also on domestic policy is failing. Education standards, which was Scotland's flagship.
But that's life, David Mundell. We have general elections when those things happen, don't we? Why not have referendums?
Well, we, of course, we have the electoral cycle, but we have a choice in terms of the timing of a referendum. And, it's clear most people in Scotland don't think that next year or any time soon is the right time to have another referendum. Even people I speak to who support independence don't think that this is the time. And I think the other factor which will come into focus is that in the 8 years since the 2014 referendum, those proposing independence haven't answered the big questions. What is Scotland's currency going to be? What is the currency arrangement? We've seen in relation to the Northern Ireland Protocol how difficult it is in terms of cross-border trade on the same island. That issue hasn't been resolved.
The new Hadrian's
the
Wall.
future of the future of the relationship with the EU. Nobody can say definitively what it would be. I'm not saying that Scotland wouldn't be in the EU, but Nicola Sturgeon can't say that Scotland would be in the EU. It's incredibly uncertain.
Some of those questions asked about Britain pre-Brexit. I mean, not on the currency, but on other areas. Lots of uncertainty. That's the nature of Brexit. It's about giving power back to governments to do what you want with that power. That's the point of Brexit.
Well, I think that most people would argue in relation to the Brexit debate that perhaps a lot of questions weren't fully debated and investigated during the period of the referendum. So I think in terms of Scotland, we saw that in 2014, and if we were to do it all over again, then these issues should be fully and completely debated. So, I mean, it is a pretty basic question. What currency is an independent Scotland going to use? How are you going to resolve these issues of getting goods across the border? And then, of course, the other big issue, how are you going to cope with the huge decrease in capacity for public spending? Where's the money going to come from? Now, all of these questions, that there are answers, and there are people in Nicola Sturgeon's party and others who say, well, we want to be independent regardless of what the economic consequences are, what it does to public services, because we sign up to the principle of independence. But many, many other people don't. What they want to know is that actually being independent would be better. And I think those making the case for independence have to demonstrate that being independent would be better than the deal that we have as part of the United Kingdom.
As you said, it's 8 years since the last indyref in 2014. I was in Scotland covering it for 2 weeks for the Telegraph, and you were there, of course, at the time campaigning. It was said then by Alex Salmond, the then leader of the SNP, it was a once-in-a-generation moment, wasn't it? Now, I've looked up what a generation means. Now, you and I are probably 2 generations old, but it's about 25 years, involves children growing up and leaving school.
I think many nationalists are very clear now. They didn't mean that. It was said for the moment. It was said, in fact,
you mean
to get their own people out to vote.
It was a lie.
It wasn't true. They didn't mean it. And they demonstrated that on the day after the referendum. The next day, there were people out campaigning for independence. So SNP MPs have said in the House of Commons it was a tactic to make sure that everybody who supported independence actually came out and voted, because otherwise they would have missed their chance. So that, I'm afraid, we're not going to be able to rely on.
Is the SNP's difficulty that they exist to create an independent Scotland? That's the end point, and all policies must be viewed through that prism, and therefore they will keep pushing for another vote, indyref 3 and 4 and 5, if they don't win the vote, which they're holding next year.
Well, I think we've got to wait and see whether there'll be a vote next year. Well, there's a reference to the Supreme Court. It's not clear whether the Supreme Court will accept that reference, because the procedures that are set out are that it's a bill, once it's been passed by the Scottish Parliament, that would be referred to the Supreme Court as to whether it fell within the powers of the Scottish Parliament.
They pass the bill in Scotland, then it goes to the Supreme Court to rule if they can have it against Section 30 of the Scotland Act.
That's been the process as set out. What Nicola Sturgeon has sought to do is to ask the Supreme Court, ahead of the Scottish Parliament passing a bill. I mean, there are many people who suspect that the reason for that is so that she knows the Supreme Court will say no, and she will then be able to say, I wanted to have a referendum, but somebody has stopped me from having it, and then I'm going to turn the next general election into a de facto independence referendum. And we've seen that SNP politicians can't agree on what the criteria for that would be, because some have said it's the majority of MPs, some have said it's a majority of votes cast. But most people who are voting in a general election are not doing so on a single issue. They're doing it from whether they like their MP, whether they like particular policies a government's following, whether they want to see the change in the UK government or not. You can't just assert that the general election is a referendum on independence. That's contemptuous of the electorate.
Is she trying to act now, have a vote while Johnson is there because he's so unpopular north of the border?
I think what's clear is that people in Scotland don't actually see this issue in the context of individual personalities. Alex Salmond, who was a champion of independence, hugely unpopular now in Scotland for all sorts of reasons.
Because he's against Nicola Sturgeon, that's
well,
why.
the Prime Minister, he wouldn't deny that he's not topped the popularity polls in Scotland. But I don't think that people see it as, well, let's Scotland be independent so that Boris Johnson isn't Prime Minister, or let's vote against independence because we don't like Alex Salmond. It's a much bigger issue than individual politicians.
What will you do? Will you campaign for the union, or will you boycott the vote if it happens next October?
Well, I will wait and see what the Supreme Court say, because I respect our constitutional arrangements. I would be very, very surprised if the Supreme Court said that the Scottish Parliament had the power for a referendum. There's no purpose in having a referendum which is not a real one, not having a pretend referendum. I mean, that would just be ridiculous. But if we go into the 2024 or whenever the general election is, on the basis that the SNP are proposing an independence referendum, I'll be saying to constituents, I don't support that.
Are you sympathetic to English people who look at all the money flowing north and the fact it's several £100 more per head for Scots on their public services than in England? Are you sympathetic with some English people who might think, well, just go clear off then, because we are being, as a country, being more generous to you, and yet you seem to protest all the time
I think
about being part of the UK.
I've argued for a long time that we have to make clearer the case to people in England and across the whole of the United Kingdom, the benefits they get from being part of the United Kingdom. We've had these arguments in Scotland for a long time that are to a degree in Wales and obviously in Northern Ireland. We've got to make the case for the benefits that England has from being in the United Kingdom. I think they're very real, and that
what are they?
Well, I think in the first instance that it's about having that wider marketplace. It's about having shared values with people across the whole of the country to allow the movement across the country and the economic benefits. It's also about defence benefits that we've seen from having our whole island as part of the same defence arrangements. That would be very different if Scotland weren't part of the United Kingdom. But we're a family at heart. We're always going to have
English people who hear this endless bleating about how unfair it is for Scots when they get so much more money than taxpayers receive in this country, in the south border in England.
What I recognise is that the case for the benefits of the United Kingdom aren't regularly made in England to the extent that they're made in the other parts of the United Kingdom, and that people sometimes confuse England and Britain. And they're quite, there is no Britain without Scotland and Wales as part of it. So, it's very, very important to understand the difference that it would be from simply being England compared to being part of Britain.
Here's an idea. You're really influential in Scottish Conservative circles. You're a former Scottish Secretary. For a long period, you're the only Scottish MP, Tory MP, north of the border. Why not take on Nicola Sturgeon on the arguments you're making and beat her? Why is it not risky to suppress this demand from 40% of the people in Scotland want a referendum? Why not give it to them and then beat them on the arguments you're setting out today?
We're not suppressing demand by not
Well, because
having
you don't want to give them a vote.
by not having a referendum. It's quite clear from polling in the immediate aftermath of Nicola Sturgeon's statement that people in Scotland, the majority of people, who don't want there to be another referendum, and that even people who support independence know what a divisive event, what a distracting event a referendum is, and that now is not the time to be having that event.
Dave Mundell, former Scottish Secretary, thank you for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Thank you.
Really enjoyed it, thank you.
Now, the Conservative Party is going through something of an existential crisis in the wake of the double by-election defeat last week in the north and south of England. Should Boris Johnson focus on holding on to Red Wall seats that turned blue at the 2019 general election, or retrench to the south and fight off the resurgent Liberal Democrats? To answer that question, I thought it might be an idea to understand why people voted Tory for the first time in 2019. And who better to ask than Lee Anderson, the MP for Ashfield. Lee Anderson, welcome to Choppers Politics. It's great to have you on.
Thank you.
It's been a long time coming. You're a former Labour councillor in Ashfield. You defected in 2018. You and your family voted Conservative for the first time at the 2019 election. I hope they voted for you because you're now the MP for the area. You were a coal miner. Your dad was a coal miner. Why on earth are you a Tory MP?
Well, that's a good question. I can remember back in 2018, around the beginning of the year, I was in a Labour group meeting in Ashfield because I was a councillor there. One of the Momentum members said to me, have you ever read the works of Karl Marx? And I said, funnily enough, I haven't. He said, well, why don't you go off then and join the Tory party, Tory boy? So I thought, you know what, that's not a bad idea, actually. So I did. 2 months later, then 18 months later, I was that man's Member of Parliament. So one thing about the Labour Party, they give great career advice. And actually, I made that same journey over those 18 months as 5 or 6 million, red to blue voters, as we call them. So yes, I had a tough time to start off with when I made that journey, when I made that switch.
All your friends, I mean, it's so tribal politics. All your pals are back in Labour, and you're literally crossing the floor.
Yeah, I'm crossing the floor. And I got some abusive messages, texts, but
What was the worst thing that was said to you? We can bleep it out, Lee.
No. You get in traitor. I hope you die. I hope you get cancer. I hope you go to hell.
And that's when you joined the Tory party.
That's when I joined the Tory party.
And then most people don't become MPs after that. What made you become an MP?
We had a small association in Ashfield, not many members, about 30, I think. So the first thing I did as a Tory councillor and the Tory party members, got out there knocking on doors, campaigning, got the membership up to about 150. Got the message out there, and then when we thought there was going to be an election the following year, I was told by my membership, or asked, why don't you put your name forward? So I did, got selected, and then 18 months after me leaving the Labour Party, I was a Conservative MP in Ashfield.
Must be the fastest route to being an MP from the left and Labour Party in history.
Must be. Well, yeah.
I should ask the question that's dominating Westminster in the Red Line pub just over the road from here. Are you going to defect back to your old party?
No, not. There's not a cat in hell's chance. I mean, the Labour Party for me, when I was in the Labour Party for all those years, it was like an abusive relationship. It was never the Labour Party I wanted it to be. And people keep saying, stay and fight for the heart and soul. That's gone. That went many, many years ago, the heart and soul of the Labour Party. Completely out of touch. Don't represent the working classes anymore. And the irony is, the Conservative Party, who, let's be honest, I disliked with a passion in the 80s and 70s and early 90s, they're now the party of the working classes. It's incredible.
And the way you've been, I read that you've taken direct action against travellers establishing a camp near you. What happened there?
Yeah, we had a situation in my home village where I was the councillor, where travellers kept turning up to this particular beauty spot. And trashing the place, causing thousands of pounds worth of damage, out thieving, out stealing pets, threatening people. Typical behaviour of this particular community who were, in our area at the time. And the council refused to put barriers up at the car park. I kept asking for barriers. They refused. So at the end of the day, when the travellers left the second time, I got 2 boulders and a JCB and I blocked the car park off. And hey presto, the travellers did not return. Barriers were installed a month later, and I got a fixed penalty notice for fly tipping from the Labour Council.
That's why you and Boris Johnson have a lot in common.
Yeah.
And you're probably proud of that.
I'm a lawbreaker. It's official.
You've also talked about evicting nuisance council tenants.
Yes.
Living in tents. What was that about?
Yeah, that was before the election. In fact, I raised it in the chamber just a few days ago. Up and down the country, we have habitual criminals. These are lazy, bone idle people that just make a life of crime. And they're living in council houses, social housing, living rent-free, running their criminal activities from where they live, and making people's lives a misery on the streets.
They would contest that, wouldn't they? Of course.
Contest what?
What you're saying about them? They would say not bone idle. I mean,
well, they say that they're not. Well, they won't go to work. They're probably very, very active in their thieving and robbing and criminal activity. So yeah, they put a lot of time and effort into that. Actually, I would argue it's easier to go to work. But these people don't deserve social housing when there's hard-working people on the waiting list waiting, and I say send them to work 40 hours a week.
So if you've got a criminal record, you shouldn't get a council house?
Well, not necessarily. I believe in second chances for everybody.
Even you with your fixed penalty notice?
Even me with my previous criminal activity. Everybody deserves a second chance. But, if you want to live in a civilised society, you have to contribute towards society. And the way you do that is by working, paying your taxes and being a good citizen. What is wrong with that?
You got quite a spat, didn't you, with poverty campaigners when you said have cookery lessons and how to cook cheaply, which I remember Baroness Jenkins, Bernard Jenkins' wife, saying something similar, how you can live on a low budget if you have good cookery lessons. You got monstered on Twitter again, didn't you?
It's incredible, really. I up at my local food bank. I donate money to them.
How often are you there?
Not as much as I'd like to be. Not since this last episode happened. No. I donate money out of my own pay packet. I deliver meals for them. Do lots of work. Do the cooking lessons with vulnerable people. I've had other MPs there teaching people basically how to cook on a budget
because they don't know how to do it.
Some of the people that we were trying to help didn't even know what certain vegetables were or how to cook them. So they was collecting the food parcel, going home and throwing all the fresh stuff away.
So what do you say to these critics then who on Twitter who pile into you as an uncaring Tory?
Yeah, well, I say get a grip, come to Ashfield, come and see these people. I mean, I brought the press up, the press came, and I think that's the end of the story, apart from some of the gutter press, like the Daily Mirror, they try and run with it. But at the end of the day, all I'm trying to do is help people who's less well off than me.
You're out there saying you're against taking the knee. You stopped watching England games. Is that still the case? Have you relented on it?
I've not watched England now since, before the last World Cup. I mean, I've sort of accepted now that if footballers want to take the knee, that's fair enough. I don't agree with it, but, we're living in it.
It's a way of respecting, isn't it? All races.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what they're doing.
I think so.
I think it's seen as a political thing at the beginning. I think it's not that at all.
I think the thing is, Chris, when it was first happening with the knee, we were seeing riots on Whitehall here, and that really got to me. We were seeing policemen being attacked. We were seeing Labour MPs. It was awful stuff. And then we've got our national football team. Wearing the Three Lions. English lads out there. Kicking the ball about for our country. Yet there's other people doing the same symbols out there that's basically disrespecting our Queen, our democracy, and our police, and I don't think that's acceptable.
All the things you talked about, are these the values of the modern Tory party? Do you think what you're describing, the battles you fought in Ashfield, is that have a lot in common with the values in Guildford, for example? I mean, that's what's so fascinating about you and who you stand for, because you're the modern day Tory party.
Yeah. I've always said that people in places like Ashfield and in the Red Wall seats have always been conservative, socially conservative. They're aspirational. They respect they respect our police. They love Queen and country. They love the flag. They want their children to do a little bit better than them. They want their kids to have a good education. These are all conservative values. But what they've never done is voted Conservative.
And where do you think the centre of gravity is now, the Tory party?
Well, that's a difficult one.
Go on, name an area of the country, you see. I find it fascinating.
Well, I think the political geography has been turned on its head in this country. It's gone north to south, or south to north.
So is it time the party let the Lib Dems win more seats in the south and move north?
Well, I think we've always had it tough up north and in the Midlands. We've always had note. Our pits are gone, our factories are gone, our industry's gone. So, you can't threaten us with taking our jobs away or decimating our industry. That's gone. We're rebuilding. And I think that the Labour Party have actually taken the North and the Midlands for granted. And we've seen that, and we've voted with our feet.
If Boris Johnson was here in the pub today with me, sitting here, just you and me in the pub, what would you say to him?
What would I say to Boris? I would say, boss, you've got something that not many leaders has got. He's got that charisma.
He signed you up.
Yeah, he's got that vision. I campaigned for him to be leader. I wish sometimes he wouldn't try and please everybody, because I think he tries to please too many people. Sometimes in politics, you have to take a side. It's as simple as that. You can't sit on the fence. You've just got to go for it and think, even Maggie, who I disliked with a passion back in the day, you knew where you stood with her. If she was winning to battle, she wasn't wavering. She'd see that ultimate goal.
Is Thatcher the past and Johnson the future for you?
I'd like to see a bit of Maggie back.
You can't stand her?
Even though I couldn't stand her at the time, but I actually agreed, looking back, she is what this country needed at that time. We was on our arse, really, in this country. The unions were running the place. Nothing was getting done.
Is that tax cuts, Lee Anderson?
Tax cuts, cut tax all day long. I can't think of any economy what's failed after cutting taxes.
We're sitting here in Westminster. You've got 1 minute left before you leave. Outside, Steve Bray is a campaigner to stop Brexit. Steve, I won't go into your various on-street contretemps with him, your battles with him on Twitter, which are worth looking at if you haven't seen them yet. What's your problem with Steve Bray?
I haven't got a problem with Steve Bray. He is a prolific nuisance. My problem is grown men hanging around the streets all day, dressed in silly outfits, not contributing towards society.
Isn't up to him though? I mean, he's raising money to fund it.
But when he's shouting out things, to Tory MPs,
not rude things, just political questions.
They're not political.
Well,
questions.
He shouts Tory scum at you all generally.
Charlatans, you thieves, liars, cheats.
It does belittle because you're in this game for public service, right? You're trying to make life better for the people you're representing. Yeah. That's the.
On the final note, I'll tell you what Steve Bray is. He's like that Japanese soldier wandering around a jungle island 40 years after the war's ended, no shoes and socks on, bayonet fixed, still wanting to fight to the death over a lost cause.
That's Steve Bray. But he's not going to stop though. I know you in favour of the efforts this week by the police to remove his amps. Which is making him into a martyr.
No, he is a nuisance with those amps. I think the songs are quite funny. In fact, I'm almost humming.
Bye, Boris.
Yes, I'm humming them myself. As I walk by. But it's the workers on Whitehall and in the parliamentary offices that can't open the windows because they can't concentrate. Because
perhaps just agree a volume level, not 11 but 5.
Maybe.
Because taking things away, he's raised 80,000 quid overnight on Monday after the police came.
Yeah, the world's gone mad, hasn't it?
And did you not think finally you and Steve Bray are actually quite similar?
No, not at all. I don't walk around.
Have you talked to him? Because
I've tried to engage him, but he won't talk to you. He just shouts. He just go about. I think he only knows about 3 or 4 words. It's charlatan, scum, traitor.
For the cameras.
It is a freak show. He is a tourist attraction.
And just finally, Lee Anderson, it's great to have you on very quickly on Thursday morning. Should Boris Johnson fight the next election as your leader?
Yes.
Why?
Because he's a proven winner.
Who else would you vote for if it weren't him?
Me.
Lee Anderson, thank you for joining us today on Choppers Politics. Great to have you on. Thank you.
Great to be here.
Well, Lee Anderson is not joining the Labour Party. You heard it here first, folks. But the talk this week in Parliament has been the talk of possible defections to the Labour Party from the Tory benches. Coming up, I'll be talking to one Tory MP who did just that, and it wasn't easy. Right after this.
If you're finding this podcast interesting, you may also like our new daily podcast, Ukraine, the Latest. Every weekday, the Telegraph's leading journalists bring you the latest news and the most informed analysis of President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. From our newsroom in London, and from the ground.
The Russian machine has been ground to a halt now for well over a week, and that is just staggering.
NATO has to act now. It has to do more than it's currently doing. Otherwise, in this Ukrainian MP's words, you'll have to evacuate the whole continent.
One video that we found to be incorrect was bomb squads seen in the Donbass region. The metadata of this clip shows that it was created in 2019, not today.
Search Ukraine, the Latest, in the same place you're listening to this, and click follow so you don't miss an update.
Now this week, the chatter in Westminster has been all about whether any MPs, Tory MPs, may jump ship to join Labour. Weekend Report said 6 Tory MPs might do that. The Telegraph reported only 3 might do it. So what's it like to cross the floor in British politics? I called up Phillip Lee, who did just that in 2019 when he quit the Tories and joined the Liberal Democrats at the height of the Brexit wars. Phillip Lee, welcome to Choppers Politics.
Yeah, well, it's good to be. Thank you for asking me.
That's right. It's a long time no see. A former MP, of course. Now, we got you on because the talk in Westminster this week has been about whether 3 or 6 Tory MPs might defect to Labour. And we were trying to think who has got a story to tell about defecting and how hard that is. And I thought of you because I've known you for years. You're an old pal from politics, but also you did cross the floor from the Conservative Party to the Liberal Democrats at the height of the Brexit saga, the Brexit wars. What's that like?
It wasn't an easy decision. I mean, even though I like to think my defection was on principle, I'm not so sure the people who are reportedly considering it at the moment that's more to do with their bank balances. I think it's to do with their financial security, by the sounds of it. But on principle, I thought about it long and hard. It didn't happen overnight. I was good friends with Alistair Carmichael. That's where the link was, and Alistair and I just chatted, very relaxed way. There was no pressure on either side really, and then I guess the elevation of Boris Johnson to being Prime Minister and what that I knew that was going to involve, and I think subsequently, since I've left politics, I think we've all seen that in Technicolor. The elevation of him, plus the people who came in with him, the direction of travel clearly was set for the Conservative Party to no longer be the party I could feel comfortable in. So I sort of went away over the summer, but I sort of knew coming back that what I was going to do. And in fact, I brought it forward, crossing the floor, because of the sort of prorogation lying to the Queen thing. And I thought, God, if they can do this, they're going to do anything. I need to act. So let's go now.
And how did you go about, who did you tell first? Your family, your local party chairman, your friends in the House of Commons? Who did you speak to first?
My wife, 100% knew all along. I'd had concerns for a number of months. It was a sort of incremental thing. So she knew. And then I had a little close team who knew. They sort of didn't know when as such. And on the, when it was happening, I sort of informed all the relevant people, including the association chairman at the time, in advance, and then just did it. But I was nervous. I was wearing an iWatch, one of those Apple watches, and it went absolutely berserk because I was so tachycardic. I mean, my heart rate was going, and it started sort of vibrating and flashing red at me when I was in the chamber. So I mean, the actual sort of personal thing, it feels quite pressured. And as you recall, Chris, that whole period in politics was incredibly febrile and challenging and pressured, and everyone was very emotional on both sides of the argument actually at the time. So it wasn't easy, but I sort of once done, it felt the right thing to do, and it remains the case to this day.
And the way you did it from memory, Phillip Lee, I think the first we knew about it was one of those amazing Prime Minister's Questions moments, wasn't it? I think when you maybe crossed the floor just on the eve of that.
It was actually when the Prime Minister was standing up to talk about something related to Brexit and the European Union, and he had just started his speech to the Chamber on September the 3rd, I think it was. And a colleague, I'll leave it at that, a parliamentary colleague who was aware shortly before had said, a couple of days before, said, "I know what you should do. You should do it on that day at that point." He said that's powerful, because don't forget, Chris, I was taking away the government's working majority at that point, and so me moving like that was internally, in parliamentary arithmetic terms, quite significant. And
that's right, because I remember watching it from the House of Commons press gallery, and it was September 2019, and that was the moment at which the government lost its majority, wasn't it? I think,
yes,
from memory.
Yes, it was.
And you were the physical manifestation of that. You were the physical manifestation of that moment happening. I've never seen it before, and maybe never see it again. The actual moment at which physically, because you moved seats in the House of Commons, that lost the government's majority.
Yes, and I was very conscious of that. In fact, I think at the time I was somewhat surprised there wasn't more of a response from the media here in the UK, because what was interesting, the American media, by contrast, were very interested. So the Washington Post flew someone over, profile piece. Stephen Colbert did a piece in which he references it, and that went viral. And it was very interesting. America, because they were going through all their sort of trials and tribulations over Trump, they were looking at this thinking, how come there isn't a Republican? In fact, I recall there was a tweet by some American Politico, which was liked 500,000 times, referencing me and saying, how come we haven't got a congressman or a senator who can do this? So the Americans took an unexpectedly deep interest in what was, I thought, quite a modest sort of personal principled move, more so the Americans than in any other part of the world. It was very, very interesting for me at sort of epicenter of it briefly. You know how media moves on very quickly, but in that sort of 48-hour period,
Sorry.
in that 48-hour period, it was really noticeable how the British media were not as interested in me as foreign media, particularly the American media.
Did you have any feedback from colleagues in the local association or friends of yours on the Tory benches? I wonder what they said. I mean, we can bleep out swear words.
Well, the local association sort of leading members, I mean, my association had gone through some transformation in the preceding year or so, and there was entryism all over the place. And so there was they were not best pleased, but those individuals who'd come in had wanted to get rid of me. So it was a mixed feeling, I think they sort of had of, I'm glad to have got rid of him, but I can't believe he's done it, sort of in this way, sort of response. There were some members of my local association who were personally supportive, and indeed, people who'd backed me locally followed me to run against Wokingham in Wokingham against John Redwood in the election. So it wasn't all negative, but no, it was not straightforward in local political terms at all. But this is the thing about being a member of Parliament: you're elected on a Conservative manifesto, or a Lib Dem manifesto, or whoever it is, but you're actually formally you have the responsibility to act in the best interests of your constituents and indeed the country as a national politician. And that tension is difficult, and also yourself and your own conscience and your own principles and values or what have you. And it came to the fore with me. I had internal red lines, Chris, and they were crossed over that whole affair and the elevation of someone who I thought was personally totally inappropriate for the role, for lots of reasons which everybody knows in the background, everyone knew about, and not many people talk about it, but they all knew. And for me, it was an internal red line had been crossed, and that's why I did what I did. It wasn't in my own personal political interest in terms of wanting a career and ministerial office and cabinet office and all that sort of thing. Indeed, the Prime Minister had offered me ministerial office in July of 2019. So
on that, I mean, we're talking as friends outside of politics now, but I think you had ambitions maybe to lead the party one day. I don't know, and a lot of colleagues of yours do. I mean, I think that was there when I talked to you sometimes, and you gave all that away. Let me finish. You gave all that away for your principles, didn't you?
Yes, but I would add that any ambitions I might have had, and actually most Tory MPs privately have these ambitions, Chris, as you well know, but any of those ambitions I might have had went up in smoke when the country voted for Brexit. It was pretty bloody obvious that the Conservative Party's membership were Brexit supporting. So you had to be seen, and indeed, I'm pretty confident in asserting that the current Prime Minister really didn't care either way on the Brexit debate, but backed what he thought would advance his political career, and that's why he's where he is now.
Do you regret anything? Do you regret making your stand on a matter of principle as you saw it? Do you look at colleagues of yours who swallowed their pride and didn't, and now maybe in the government and doing things you may have wanted to do back then? Do you regret anything, or do you think you made the right choice?
For me personally, I have no regrets whatsoever, because I could not have lived with myself. There's compromise in politics. It can be a mucky business. 'Twas ever thus. I'm not an idealist. I'm not being naive. But there's a point where I think internally for me it was just not acceptable, and I had to do what I did. And the same applied to Sam Gyimah, same applied to Gito Bebb. It wasn't just me, there were others who behaved like that. I must say, I sort of look on at the parliamentary party now, at colleagues who I know never have supported the Prime Minister personally and have never supported Brexit. They think it's a complete disaster, and yet they're still there, and I just look at them and I do wonder how they sleep at night.
Just finally, Phillip Lee, what's your advice to those Red Wall Tory MPs who are now considering defecting? What's your advice to them, and how to go about it, and what to think about, and how to work out in their heads if that's the right thing to do?
Yeah, on a personal, sort of on a human level, right? They think clearly about this, because this is actually a more significant move than you realise. because all political parties have different cultures and different things going on. And by definition, you're always going to be associated, however fairly or not, with your past association with a political party. They don't want advice from me. They far from it. In fact, I suspect the individuals concerned. I do look at it and do wonder how on earth, in the space of 2 years, I have some sympathy with Boris Johnson here, how these characters can stand on a ticket to deliver the Brexit we've got with a prime minister that we've got, and then suddenly start saying, "Oh no, I'm not happy with where this is going." In all credibility, I mean, God, they've got no credibility, Chris, and they've got no honour, really, because fundamentally what's been delivered is what was always promised. We knew what we were getting in terms of the Brexit that we've got, and we knew what we were getting in terms of the Prime Minister we've got. And whatever's happened since December 2019, none of it has come as a surprise to me, or the small sort of list of names of people like Dominic and Grieve and Anna Seabury. We all sort of thought this was coming. And it's happened, and we're sad. I'm sad about it personally. I don't want my country to be in this situation, but it is what it is.
Well, Phillip Lee, a life for public service, whatever you're doing. Thanks for joining us this week on Choppers Politics. Great to have you on, and all the best to you.
Absolute pleasure, Chris. Thanks for asking.
Well, that's all for this week, listeners. I would love to know your thoughts on what our guests have discussed today. Please email me, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or on Twitter, we're at chopperspodcast. For more from me, please sign up to my daily Choppers Politics newsletter, bringing you the best Westminster insights straight into your email inbox every weekday. Sign up for that, telegraph.co.uk/politics newsletter. And do be sure to check out my weekly Peterborough Diary gossip column, out at 7 p.m. on Fridays on the Telegraph's website, and in Saturday's brilliant Soar Away newspaper. Thank you to my guests this week, Lee Anderson MP, David Mundell MP, and Phillip Lee, a former MP. Thank you to my producers Giles Gear and Louisa Wells. And as ever, thank you to you for listening. And always, if you can, buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph. You won't regret it. Until next time though, from the Red Lion Pub, cheerio!